Clerk, let's call item number 29.
Yes, item number 29 was considered by the Government Audit and Oversight Committee at a regular meeting on Thursday, November 3rd, 2022 at 10 o'clock a.m. This matter was recommended to the full board as a committee report. It is a resolution urging the Mayor's Office and Department of Public Health to ensure no gap in services for the hundreds of people served daily by the Tenderloin Center.
Thank you so much, Madam Clerk. Supervisor Preston.
Thank you, President Walton. And we discussed this item extensively in committee. This resolution urges the Mayor's Office and Department of Public Health to ensure that replacement services are available for the hundreds of visitors that use the Tenderloin Center daily. And this center is scheduled to close in December. I wanted to quickly add some context here. Most of you are familiar with the center. As you may know, the Department of Public Health recently issued an overdose prevention plan that calls for the creation of multiple wellness hubs, as the mayor's referring to them and DPH is referring to them. And they're basically smaller sites in multiple neighborhoods throughout the city that provide many of the same resources that the Tenderloin Center, previously known as the Tenderloin Linkage Center, or the Linkage Center currently provides. The mayor has backed that approach of these smaller sites, these wellness hubs at multiple locations. DPH supports that, and my office supports that as well. I think it's an area of agreement, and it's important we move forward on that. Based on the public statements from the mayor and DPH, there will be a wellness hub in the Tenderloin Civic Center area soon, but a date and location have not yet been announced. I remain very concerned that closure of the Tenderloin Center with no plan to replace the services promptly will place people at risk of fatal overdoses and exacerbate a lot of the street conditions in the Tenderloin and Civic Center area. I have for months been urging the administration to partner with our office and the community to open the new Wellness Hub site in time for the center's closure. And to date, that hasn't happened. It doesn't mean it is necessarily too late, and I want to underscore we moved quick to set up center in the first place, and we should be moving quickly now to set up its replacement. So our resolution first and foremost urges that the promised wellness hub be open promptly to ensure that replacement is operational before the center closes. And if that takes more than, now we're down to less than a month, if it takes more than that time, then in the alternative, the resolution urges that the center stay open, hopefully briefly, until the wellness hub is opened. I think fundamentally, the principle here is that there must be no gap in services. I want to thank the over 50 organizations that reached out with a letter led by Safer Inside Coalition backing that position. And we understand that the current location for the Tenderloin Center was always meant to be temporary, and I don't think we're questioning that in this resolution. We have not criticized the decision to wind it down and to replace it with multiple smaller permanent locations, but we can't in good conscience simply shutter the Tenderloin Center, leaving 400 people per day without the help that they need for an indeterminate amount of time. That's not a plan for anything but increased suffering and death on our streets. Over 112,000 visitors have been served by the Tenderloin Center to date in less than a year. As of today, the center's reversed 285 overdoses, many of which would have been fatal. The center's also provided meals, showers, counseling, and referrals to treatment, shelter, and housing. Allowing the current situation, which would close the Tenderloin Center with no replacement of services and no alternative wellness hub to serve people currently using the center, would be, in my opinion, reckless, irresponsible, and cruel. And I hope that you will join me in supporting this resolution today. And I really want to thank my co-sponsors, Supervisors Ronan, Chan, Peskin, and President Walton for their co-sponsorship and urge others to support as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Preston. Supervisor Mandelman.
Thank you, President Walton. And I voted against this item in committee. I feel that there was certainly value in the establishment of the Linkage Center, and I think we learned some valuable things from the Linkage Center. I think we had been talking for a very long time about having safer consumption sites, and we sort of provided one, not 24/7, but for a significant period of time. And certainly, we learned that many people would use it, and that we could reverse the number of overdoses. And I think those are lessons that we can put to use going forward. But it has also been an extraordinarily expensive intervention at a cost of $20 million a year. If we annualize it out, there's no evidence that I see that it has reduced overdose deaths in San Francisco or in the area where it has been located, and the impacts on the surrounding community have been significant. I believe that certainly we need to be distributing services around the city, and concentrating them in one particular neighborhood is a mistake, but even distributing these services, if we do not come up with a better way of managing the impacts of those services on the sidewalks and surrounding areas, is untenable. I have many things that I want from the Department of Public Health. I want places for people to be taken now, immediately, when they are in crisis. I want longer-term placements for people who need to be in longer-term placements. I want step-down facilities for people who have been through drug treatment and need a place to go. And of all the things that I want the Department of Public Health to be focusing its energies on, keeping this facility open for an indeterminate time is low on my list of priorities. And in fact, I think the decision to wind it down is the correct one.
Thank you, Supervisor Melderman. Supervisor Dorsey?
Thank you, President Walton. And I want to express my gratitude to everybody for working on this. And I think that there are principles on which we agree that services should be continued, although I think there is a disagreement that I have with this about keeping the Tenderloin Center open when we've made a commitment to the public that this was going to be temporary. I have always felt about public policy that it is best reflected by what FDR said at the beginning of the New Deal, that it is common sense to take a method and try it, and if it fails, admit it frankly, and try another. There are good lessons that we learned from the Tenderloin Center, and I think those can be employed in other ways. And I'm encouraged by the presentation that I had and that we had on the overdose prevention plan. I think we have to be mindful when we talk about harm reduction that principles of harm reduction apply to the quality of individual and community life. And what I am hearing from the community is that this is not a continuation of something that they're going to support. And I think we're going to need community support in the future for the ambitious things that we need to do better as a city to reduce drug overdose deaths in this city, to reduce the impact of open-air drug scenes and brazen drug dealing. These are issues that are personally important to me in ways that nothing has ever been important to me in public life or policy. I want to make sure that we have the support of San Franciscans in these endeavors, and my fear is that if we were to break our commitment, that this was going to be something that we were going to close, that we're going to be continuing to lose the confidence of the San Franciscans we serve. So for that reason, I'll be opposing this resolution.
Thank you, Supervisor Dorsey. Supervisor Preston?
Thank you, President Walton. I just wanted to say on this, in terms of community impacts, that if people have concerns about the current situation on UM Plaza, and I share those concerns, and I have expressed and will continue to express my concerns with the lack of attention to that area as part of operating this center there. But I think if people have concerns about that area now, I want you to think about and go out there with me on December 5th when 400 people who are getting services there show up on December 5th, and there is no plan. I mean, we went through this in detail in committee. There is no plan for replacement of those services, no consultation with area nonprofits to make sure they can absorb the capacity and the needs of services. It is I think we can all have different views of the successes or failures of the center, but I think it is absolutely reckless to shut it down and unnecessary to shut it down with no plan in place. And I think none of us wants it continued. What we want is a replacement site that has been promised. But until that promise is fulfilled, we certainly can't leave 400 people with nowhere to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. Supervisor Peskin?
Thank you, President Walton. Colleagues, I would submit to you that the thrust of Supervisor Preston's resolution that I am a proud co-sponsor of is set forth in the title, which is No Gap in Services. There is a further resolve that says if there is a gap, then we should look at keeping this open longer, which rather than opposing it, I might offer amendments to that section. But a year ago, right around the winter holidays, the mayor stood up and said, we have an emergency, which, by the way, was already an emergency. We just recognized that it was an emergency, which was important, I think. And what that emergency and the city's response showed us was that we could stand up a facility. And here we are a year later, the Army has retreated, DEM is out, DPH is in, but that same sense of emergency urgency all of a sudden seems to be gone. But the crisis isn't gone. So I think this is really an admonition to this body, to the executive branch, that we have an obligation not to retreat, not to abandon, but to have no gap in services. And doing less than that, I think, is an abdication of the fact that this Board of Supervisors ratified the emergency.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. Supervisor Ronan?
Yeah, I just want to chime in with a couple points. Number one, with the creation of this center, with the takedown of this center, what's continuously frustrating for me is this administration's schizophrenia when it comes to dealing with mental health and the drug addiction crisis. No pun intended. We passed at the end of 2019, after a year of debate, compromise, battle, mental health SF that was unanimously supported by the board at that time. Not everyone was on the board at that time, and by the mayor. It is a sweeping overhaul of our mental health services, and it's creating a system out of a disjointed number of services that exist around the city that we spend hundreds of millions of dollars on every single year that do not work together in a comprehensive way to serve people suffering on our streets. And ever since it's passed, granted, we had a worldwide pandemic that delayed its implementation, it has been one sexy press release after another with some new idea, title, take, claim, blueprints, whatever, in direction that we're going to take, instead of just keeping the eye on the ball and doing the long-term, focused, hard work of implementing the system that was unanimously passed. It is endlessly frustrating to me. I talked to Director Dr. Hillary Cunnins weekly about it, and it drives me crazy. The reason I supported the Tenderloin emergency was not because it was a brand new emergency that we didn't know about, but because it allowed us to quickly hire 200 people. I said it then, I'll say it now. That is why I supported it. But I thought the creation of it and now the takedown of it is sloppy at best and reflects the fact that we don't have the discipline in this city to have a strategy, keep our eye on the ball, and build that strategy for the long term. And it's why we don't succeed. I'm convinced of it. That's number one. Number two, all of the emails we've received over the past few days closed the Tenderloin Center because, nice try, but the conditions were worse outside of the center than they were prior to its opening. That is a problem. That is a real problem around every single service that we offer in my district. So we have 1515 South Van Ness, a safe sleep site. We have the Division Circle Navigation Center. I'm now trying to open up a safe cabin site at 1979 Mission. And it's my office and my constituents that are constantly begging the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing to make sure that the conditions around those centers are clean, safe, flawless, encampment-free, graffiti-free, trash-free, because we cannot ask our constituents to accept these services in our neighborhoods if the area surrounding them becomes worse than it was before they were placed there. We cannot ask that of our constituent. It is not fair. It is not, it doesn't make sense. And I beg Shireen McSpadden and Emily Cohen and Dylan Schneider every single week to clean up the areas around 1515 and South Van Ness, or I'm going to start the petition to take them down, because I can't fight to open yet another service center for homeless folks in the Mission when this city cannot maintain in a clean and orderly fashion the homeless services that we open up. And it's yet to happen. So we have a problem in the city with focused attention to implementing a single strategy that we all agree on should be the strategy. And then number two, when we open those services, keeping them in a way that anyone would welcome them into their neighborhood, because things get better, not worse, when they come in.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan. Supervisor Safai?
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Ronan. I have to tell you, I've been on this board for 6 years. I don't think there was a day that I was more frustrated than the day that we were called into an emergency session. And we literally sat here, sat in front of our computers. It started here and then it transitioned until Christmas Eve. We were here until Christmas Eve, listening and talking about this. I had reservations then. I was not convinced that there would be follow-through then. I didn't like the location then. I did not hear a plan then. As Supervisor Peskin said, this has been an emergency in the city for years. So to put something together at the last second and call it an emergency and then not have a plan for follow-through, it started out, all of a sudden, it was Department of Emergency Management. We were having an emergency. Then it quickly morphed into the Department of Public Health. And it was an unofficial overdose prevention site, safe consumption site. Let's call it what it was. I went there myself. I was flabbergasted. I said, if I walk in here and I want to be clean, if I want to be recovering, if I'm a recoverer or trying to recover, and I'm surrounded by people openly using drugs in front of me, I can't speak from the same passion and perspective as Supervisor Dorsey, but I can imagine the first thing I said, this has to be triggering. This has to be a problem. So, I mean, this morphed into a Department of Public Health site without metrics, without data, without accountability. We asked for those things. It was a linkage to nowhere. I'm sorry. What were we linking to? I don't know. So I did not like the plan from the beginning. I tried to defer to the administration. Like Supervisor Ronan, we had two objectives that came out of the plan. We wanted the Minna Street project. We got that accomplished. We cut the ribbon on that. We wanted emergency services programming and treatment at General Hospital funded. We got that funded. But I had no faith that there would be any follow-through on this plan. I think the surrounding businesses were caught by surprise. I think the theater, I think the
all of the ground floor. This is the gateway, one of the gateways to our civic government. And I'm sorry, it is an embarrassment. It is not the right location. I normally, and Supervisor Preston and I had a good conversation, I normally will defer to the supervisor of the district. I feel ambivalent about this. I don't want the rug pulled out. I want services continued. We bought a site. We went through a whole process. We supported the administration. We have a location on, I think it's Geary, up in the
822.
Right? But it's been sitting there. When's that going to open? I went to the site. I went to the site on Howard over in Soma. That's a nice wellness drop-in. But where's the formal plan? It doesn't make sense to me. So I feel ambivalent about this. I understand the desire and the need to want to continue services, and I'm for that. But at the same time, I am not for continuing this at this location. I don't feel like we're getting what was sold or presented to the public, and I don't feel like there's a real plan to continue it, although there are some good providers at the site. So I still feel ambivalent about it as we talk about this, but I have to tell you, general frustration, like Supervisor Ronan, we have this dramatic need. We have mental health SF. Where's the follow through on that? We've been talking about that for years. That's where we should be putting a lot of our energy. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Supervisor Safai. Supervisor Ronan.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, since you brought up the Geary Street, that is going to be the Crisis Diversion Center that we needed, how long ago, Supervisor Mandelman? 10 years ago. It is not going to be open for a year and a half at best. And I have a weekly phone call that I had to demand that I have with the DPW person who's not the project manager, because there is no project manager assigned to that site, to figure out how I can fast track any piece of it or put any pressure on it to open it up faster. Because without a crisis diversion center, which is not the mental health SF service center that the law requires they create, but it's at least the next best thing, is not going to open for a year and a half at best. That's what's happening with that site. It's insane, you guys. It's insane.
Thank you, Supervisor Ronan. Supervisor Melgar.
Thank you, President Walton. I am a believer in supporting the supervisor, where the district, the district supervisor in whatever they want to do in their district. For this one, I'm also torn. I'm ambivalent about it for a couple reasons. One is, when we were all here on Christmas Eve, talking about this, I did meet with a bunch of the constituents there in the Tenderloin. And this linkage center was actually one of their demands. It was their idea to have a place where people could go take a shower and do all of that. I met with the same people, this past week, and it has not worked out in the way that they had intended. And that really does give me pause. On the other hand, I want to live in a city where we can have innovation, where if there's an emergency or nascent needs, our departments can be nimble and stand up services and programs in short order, and also assess them to see if they work. And if they don't work, to be able to just scrap it and do something else that does, and to be disciplined, as Supervisor Ronan talked about, in terms of looking at the data, seeing if the outcomes, not just outputs, it's not just 400 people being served. It's like, how do we serve them? Did the services that we provide have the intended outcome? And so I want to see that. And I'm frustrated in my own district because Supervisor Marr and I have been working on trying to stabilize a whole population, a community that lives in their vehicles. And we have been really unable to get the department to re-pivot from the model that, deals with homelessness for people living in tents on the sidewalk, which is very different as a population than the people living in their vehicles. And again, I want to be able to live in a city where our city government can pivot, to deal with different needs, different models in different neighborhoods. And what I fear is that if we don't give the department the ability to say, okay, we tried this, it didn't work, that they will then, just get stuck even more than where they are now, and, have the inability to pivot and to meet needs in different geographic areas with different populations, and to provide different services, when they're no longer needed, or if we know that their best practices yield better results, and to be able to redirect. And so I am not sure about this. I have gotten, like we all have, lots of, correspondence from folks saying, different things. But I, even though I hear you, Supervisor Peskin, what this resolution says is continuity of services, and I would like to see continuity of services. I'm not sure I can live with, if we don't have that, then we should keep this open, because that part I'm not so sure about. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Melgar. And just real quick, Supervisor Preston, I do recall being one of the no votes for the declaration of the emergency, and not so much because of the setup of the Linkage Center, but to Supervisor Peskin's point, we were definitely in a crisis, an emergency, and we needed to get the work done regardless. And I agree with Supervisor Melgar. There needs to be something in place where we can move faster and be more nimble. But even though I did not support the declaration, my biggest concern is a gap in services and what happens the very next day. I'm not comfortable with shutting something down and all the services go away and we don't have a plan in place to address that. And I think it's very reasonable to ask for something to be in place. Supervisor Preston?
Thank you, President Walton. I share a lot of the frustrations that have been expressed around the lack of follow-through on some of these initiatives. I think, frankly, the way we communicate that frustration and try to get the follow-through is through a resolution of this type. And so I hope folks will support it. I did want to just note, though, that we made a very significant and I think positive step forward. Through the redistricting, Tenderloin became part of my district about 6 months ago. We worked closely for months with the Department of Public Health around creating. The city did not have an overdose prevention plan, and we worked together. And I want to say, in terms of having a strategy and in terms of actually moving forward in a collaborative way, I want to give huge props and credit to DPH, Dr. Cunnins and her team for working with our office on that and working with the mayor on that and coming to a point of agreement. So I think part of what's frustrating here is that's like within the last couple months, where instead of this scattershot approach, like we were starting to make some progress. And that plan, and I really urge folks to read it because it's detailed, it's solid. Maybe it should be a little more ambitious, but they were balancing being realistic and ambitious. It is an excellent document. It is something that we fully support. DPH fully supports. The mayor supports. And in that document, they define as the cornerstone of our overdose prevention plan as a city, these wellness hubs and getting these up and running. So this is not an area of people can have their different views about safe consumption, all that, but the city, everyone's coming together around smaller sites that provide these kind of services and launching them. And what's missing here is just this creating unnecessarily, by lack of planning, creating a situation where you just have services one day and then they're gone the next day. And that's the heart of this resolution, as Supervisor Peskin has pointed out, is to make sure there is no gap in services. So I urge your support and thank you for the time and discussion.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. I don't see anyone else on the roster. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll on item 29?
On item 29, Supervisor Ronan. Ronan, aye. Supervisor Safai.
No.
Safai, no. Supervisor Stephanie. Stephanie, no. Supervisor Walton.
Aye.
Walton, aye. Supervisor Chan. Chan, aye. Supervisor Dorsey. Dorsey, no. Supervisor Mandelman.
No.
Mandelman, no. Supervisor Marr. Marr, aye. Supervisor Melgar.
No.
Melgar, no. Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston. Preston, aye. There are 6 ayes and 5 noes, with Supervisor Safai, Stephanie, Dorsey, Mandelman, and Melgar in the dissent.
Thank you. By a vote of 6 to 5, this resolution is adopted. Madam